Hour, I'll be reading the March 18th, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. As always, thank you for joining us today. The highlights under business and finance are: OpenAI executives are completing plans to refocus the company on coding and business users, recognizing that a do everything all at once strategy has put them on the defensive. Microsoft unified the teams working on different versions of its Copilot artificial intelligence product, aiming to deliver a more coherent client experience. The broad-based S&P 500 index rose 0.2%, with energy the best performing sector, while the Nasdaq and Dow Industrials gained 0.5% and 0.1% respectively. A federal court in Texas struck down a law governing asset transfers between 401k accounts and IRAs that required financial advisors to act in the best interest of their clients. Amazon.com is introducing 1- and 3-hour delivery services in the U.S. as it moves to repel a growing threat from Walmart and respond to intensifying shipping competition. Airlines offered an early look at how they plan to outpace the rising cost of jet fuel as uncertainty lingers over the Middle East conflict. Victory Capital sweetened its offer to buy Janus Henderson in an effort to reverse the proposal's unanimous rejection by the Target's board last week. NVIDIA has restarted manufacturing of its H200 processors for sale in China, CEO Jensen Huang said, signaling a possible shift in the chip giant's fortunes. The World Bank confessed to an error of more than 3 decades duration, moving to embrace industrial policy as interventions become increasingly popular with governments in search of growth. Canadian investor Stephen Smith will take a 26.9% stake in the publisher of The Economist after agreeing with Lynn Forrester de Rothschild to buy her family's shares in the magazine. Now for the key articles under the worldwide section. Israel's killing of Iranian security chief Ali Larijani removed a veteran leader in Tehran, shaking a regime that had appeared to be weathering airstrikes with its grip on the country intact. Russia has been expanding its intelligence sharing and military cooperation with Iran, providing satellite imagery and improving drone technology to aid Tehran's targeting of U.S. forces in the region. The top U.S. counterterrorism official said he resigned over his concerns with the war in Iran, marking the first significant departure from the Trump administration because of the conflict. The MTA sued the Trump administration for withholding about $58.6 million earmarked for an expansion of New York City's subway system. The Trump administration which has been skeptical of vaccines that prevent infections, is going all in on the new initiative to deploy novel vaccines against cancer. The Taliban's public health ministry raised the death toll to 400 after rockets the government and an international aid group said were fired by Pakistan and hit a 2,000-bed drug rehab clinic. Trump's clemency for rioters who stormed the Capitol also should apply to a man charged with placing pipe bombs in Washington on the eve of the melee, his attorneys argued. Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton won Illinois' Democratic primary in the race to succeed retiring Senator Dick Durbin in a boost for Governor J.B. Pritzker. Cuba's communist government struggled to restore electricity across the island after its obsolete power grid collapsed on Monday. Venezuela won the World Baseball Classic, defeating the U.S. 3-2 in the final. The picture on today's front page shows a group of bagpipers obviously marching down Fifth Avenue because St. Patrick's Cathedral is in the background. And that caption reads, Gale Force. The New York Police Department Emerald Society skirls down Fifth Avenue Tuesday in the St. Patrick's Day Parade. And that caption reads, the pipes are calling. And I did not realize skirl, S-K-I-R-L, means to play the bagpipes. Now for other articles from the front page. OpenAI to pair side projects to focus on its core business. AI pioneer plans to emphasize coding, enterprise work amid pressure from rivals. By Berber Jin. OpenAI's top executives are finalizing plans for a major strategy shift to refocus the company around coding and business users, recognizing that a do-everything all-at-once strategy has put them on the defensive. Fidji Simo, OpenAI's CEO of applications, previewed the changes to employees in an all-hands meeting, telling them that top leaders, including CEO Sam Altman and Chief Research Officer Mark Chen, were actively looking at areas to deprioritize. They expect to notify staff about the changes in the coming weeks. We cannot miss this moment because we are distracted by side quest, Simo told the staff last week, according to remarks reviewed by the Wall Street Journal. We really have to nail productivity in general, and particularly productivity on the business front. Last year, OpenAI announced an array of new products, including the video generator Sora, a web browser called Atlas, a new hardware device, and e-commerce features for ChatGPT. Altman has previously likened this approach to betting on a series of startups inside OpenAI, and the strategy helped burnish the company's reputation as the pioneer of the AI era. News Corp owner of the Wall Street Journal has a content licensing partnership with OpenAI. OpenAI is under growing pressure from rival Anthropic, which has become the dominant AI provider for businesses because of the viral success of its Claude Code and co-work offerings. These products, which include so-called agents that can autonomously carry out complex tasks for users, have become all the rage in Silicon Valley and even sparked a global stock market sell-off last month. Anthropic has placed fewer product bets than OpenAI, focusing its efforts on the enterprise and coding market. The company has so far avoided image and video generation products. For example, OpenAI and Anthropic have taken steps toward public listings that could take place as soon as this year, plans that have added extra urgency to the ferocious competition between the two companies. Neither company has disclosed specific timing, but in some discussions, OpenAI raised the prospect of an initial public offering in the fourth quarter of this year, the Wall Street Journal has reported. Simo told staff Anthropic's success should serve as a wake-up call for the company, and that it had to regain the lead among software developers and enterprise customers. Current and former employees said that last year's do everything approach sometimes created a lack of focus, and that it was at times difficult to understand OpenAI's strategic direction. That is a problem in many organizations, but the stakes are higher at OpenAI and other frontier labs, where the central issue is how to spend and allocate scarce computing capacity between projects. Israeli strikes kill top Iranian leaders. Attacks on security chief and the militia head complicate how Tehran runs war. By Anat Peled and Benoit Falcon. Israel's killing of Iranian security chief Ali Larijani removes a veteran leader in Tehran, shaking a regime that had appeared to be weathering thousands of airstrikes with its grip on the country and war-fighting capacity intact. It was accompanied by a successful Israeli attack on the head of the country's repressive Basij militia the same day. A double blow, analysts said, could further complicate the regime's ability to run the war effort and maintain control, even though it isn't likely to bring it down. Israel's military said on Tuesday it hit more than 10 posts belonging to the militia over the past day. Larijani's death, announced by Israel early Tuesday, was the biggest hit to the country's leadership since Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei was killed by Israel in the opening salvo of the war. The 67-year-old veteran leader was a central figure in Iran's aggressive region-wide response to the U.S. and Israeli airstrikes, and oversaw the violent crackdown of anti-government protests in January that left thousands dead. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Kremlin is aiding Tehran in fight with U.S. Tehran is Moscow's closest partner in the Middle East. By Thomas Grove, Milan Cherny, and Benoit Falcon. Russia has been expanding its intelligence sharing and military cooperation with Iran, providing satellite imagery and improved drone technology to aid Tehran's targeting of U.S. forces in the region, people familiar with the matter said. Russia is trying to keep its closest Middle East partner in the fight against U.S. and Israeli military might and prolong a war that is benefiting Russia militarily and economically. The technology provided includes components of modified Shahed drones, which are meant to improve communication, navigation, and targeting, the people said. Russia has also been drawing on its experience using drones in Ukraine, offering tactical guidance on how many drones should be used in operations and what altitudes they should strike from, said people who included a senior European intelligence officer. Russia has been providing Iran with the locations of U.S. military forces in the Middle East, as well as those of its regional allies, the Wall Street Journal has reported. That cooperation has deepened in early days of the war, with Russia recently providing satellite imagery directly to Iran, said two of the people, the officer and a Middle Eastern diplomat. The assistance is similar to intelligence the U.S. and European allies have given to Ukraine in recent years, analysts said. In the Gulf, Moscow's aid is believed to have helped Iran with recent strikes on U.S. radar systems in the region, the people said. Those strikes have included an early warning radar for a terminal high altitude area defense or THAAD system in Jordan, as well as other targets in Bahrain, Kuwait, and Oman. The Kremlin didn't respond to a request for comment. The Wild West of ketamine, or sometimes called ketamine. The psychedelic-like drug drives a booming, largely unregulated industry. By Shalina Ramachandran and Betsy McKay. Tricia Ann Dewey struggled for many years with domestic violence and a subsequent painkiller addiction. As she emerged from that harrowing period by age 41, the Pound Ridge, New York paralegal thought she'd found a way to repair some of the damage, a drug that internet ads and marketing on social media said would rewire her brain. The drug was ketamine, a psychedelic-like anesthetic at the center of a booming, largely unregulated industry that promises to offer relief from conditions including depression, anxiety, and insomnia. Dewey turned to Better You, one of several telehealth companies and online clinics that have emerged in recent years that offer ketamine to customers based on a remote consultation with a clinician. Reclaim your happiness with online ketamine therapy, the Better You website promises. Dewey told Better You she was already on Xanax, according to her Better You health record. The Food and Drug Administration warns that combining that with ketamine can lead to respiratory issues and even death. A clinician using the company's platform, prescribed ketamine anyway, in small, starburst-like squares that dissolve in the mouth. One evening last July, after Tricia took a dose, her mother found her face down on her bedroom floor, unresponsive. She was pronounced dead at the hospital. She trusted Better You, and she really wanted to have a better life, said her mother, Caroline Ann Ferrero, who along with Tricia's father filed a lawsuit against Better You in February. When someone is harmed or dies while seeking help for their mental health, it is a tragedy, and my heart goes out to Miss Dewey's family and loved ones, said Derek Duchesne, Chief Executive of Better You, in an email response. He said he can't comment on specifics of her case due to patient privacy obligations and on the advice of his counsel. But he defended Better You's model, saying that it's designed around careful screening, conservative dosing, required preparation appointments, and safety protocols like blood pressure monitoring. He said Better You is a technology platform that provides access to independent clinicians not employed by the company who make medical decisions based on their professional judgment. Ketamine-assisted treatment is an evolving area that carries both potential benefits and meaningful risks, Duchesne said. Private bankers now do shopping, travel, repairs, by Gunjan Banerjee and Juliet Chung. Need a last-minute private jet from Paris to New York? Or someone to manage your Hamptons property? Your money manager says she will have someone take care of it. Banks and money managers are increasingly positioning themselves as one-stop shops for the richest families around the globe. With the great wealth transfer projected to top $100 trillion in the coming years, firms are adding bells and whistles in a bid to keep assets when their clients turn over the reins to their children and to woo the next generation of clients. These services are often packaged with other family office services, with firms handling everything from paying clients' bills to helping with estate planning and prenuptial agreements. Money managers tap in-house resources or outsource to other vendors, and fees vary from one-time charges to hourly rates. Some lump them in with fees they charge for asset management. Now for other articles within the paper. Heart Attack, Stroke Risk by Andrea Peterson. People who eat around 9 servings a day of ultra-processed foods like chips and donuts have about a 67% higher risk of heart attacks, strokes, and dying from heart disease compared with those who eat about 1 serving a day, according to a new study. The risks rose with each additional serving a person ate, according to the study published Tuesday in the JACC, Advances, a journal of the American College of Cardiology. The findings add to a growing body of research linking diets high in ultra-processed foods to a range of health problems. They were released as the Department of Health and Human Services under Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. takes steps to discourage eating junk foods including issuing new dietary guidelines advising Americans to avoid highly processed foods with added sugars and salt, such as packaged chips, cookies, and candy. Nutrition researchers generally define ultra-processed foods as items containing ingredients that aren't generally found in a home kitchen, such as high fructose corn syrup and emulsifiers. Most ultra-processed foods would be considered junk food and are high in added sugars, saturated fat, and sodium. Each additional daily serving of ultra-processed foods was associated with a 5.1% increase risk of cardiovascular disease, the researchers found. The health risks associated with ultra-processed foods were higher for Black people. Black people had a 6.1% increased risk of heart attacks, strokes, and dying from heart disease for each additional daily serving of ultra-processed foods, compared with a 3.2% increased risk for other racial groups. Dr. Amir Haidar, a cardiology fellow at UT Health Houston and the lead author of a paper, talks to his patients about ultra-processed foods. He encourages them to make small changes like eliminating sugary drinks and adding more fruits and vegetables. When you eat more vegetables, you increase your fiber, you feel full longer, and that helps mitigate the overeating from when you rely on ultra-processed foods. Cuba struggles to keep lights on. Residents endure long power outages as island's economy grinds to a halt. By Santiago Perez and Jose de Cordoba. Cuba's communist government is struggling to restore electricity across the island after its obsolete power grid collapsed on Monday, exposing the magnitude of its economic implosion amid a damaging U.S. oil blockade and rising social unrest. The cause of the nationwide power outage affecting the island's 9 million residents was still unknown, and there were no reports of breakdowns in the power plants that were operating. Electricity service was halted shortly before 2 p.m. Monday. Authorities haven't provided a time frame for the full restoration of power. Some plants have been brought online, and electricity was restored to some provinces Tuesday, but supply was unstable. Authorities said they were focusing on the restart of the Antonio Guterres power plant, Cuba's largest. Residents have been enduring long power outages for years as the economy grinds to a halt. Without electricity, there's no running water either, and the little food that you stored is spoiling, said Yema Laura, a homemaker in a suburb of Havana. Those who manage to buy cooking gas are getting by somewhat, but most have to use gas or charcoal. There's no internet connection either. Unrest is spreading, and pressure on the communist regime is intensifying after the Trump administration imposed a blockade on oil shipments to the island. About 90% of Cuba's electricity generation system relies on oil, and Cuba produces only 40% of its total oil consumption needs. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the editorial page, the Allies take a pass on Iran. President Trump is angry with U.S. allies for refusing to help make the Strait of Hormuz passable for oil tankers, and the media coverage boils down to a version of serves him right. Mr. Trump has played the bully with allies who are now returning the disfavor. This is satisfying for those who dislike Mr. Trump, but the outcome may not turn out well for the allies. Europeans have a point that Mr. Trump didn't consult them before he began this round of bombing with Israel. He's also been high-handed with Europe over Greenland and with the world on his unilateral tariffs. A more conventional U.S. president would have done more to cultivate personal ties with leaders who could help smooth over rough political moments. Mr. Trump always prefers the U.S. power flex, which is no doubt grating on European sensibilities. Yet, let's assume Mr. Trump feels he must keep bombing for many more weeks to end an Iranian veto on oil flows through the Strait of Hormuz. Who will be harmed the most? Not the U.S., which is largely self-sufficient in energy. Americans will pay more for gasoline because oil is a global market. But the price of West Texas crude is still lower than the Brent crude global price, and natural gas is far less expensive in the U.S. than in Europe or Asia. Escorting ships through the strait is dangerous and costly, even for the U.S. Navy. If there's no ceasefire that Iran agrees to, Mr. Trump might decide to blow up Iran's oil energy facilities on Karg Island. On Friday, the U.S. hit Iran's military forces on the island but spared the oil production targets. Hitting those would cost Iran dearly since it is still exporting oil through the strait. It would also hit the rest of the world far more than it would the U.S. Mr. Trump said Monday, "We don't need anybody in the Gulf." But he wouldn't be asking if that were true. European countries have more mine-sweeping ships than the U.S. Naval help would reduce the burden on the U.S. Navy, which has other interests to protect around the world. These days, that includes the Caribbean and the Pacific. More important for relations with Mr. Trump for the next 3 years? Sorry, folks, he still has 34 months to go, is the message that countries were unwilling to help when asked. Mr. Trump has a long memory, and Europe simply can't defend itself without American military power. The country in Europe that most seems to appreciate this is Ukraine, of all places. President Volodymyr Zelensky has dispatched his experts on drone defenses to the Gulf, and that could well save American lives. The military in Europe most threatened at home is the one most willing to help the U.S. abroad. Mr. Trump might keep this in mind before pressuring Ukraine into a bad peace with Russia. The tragedy of this Western division is that the real winners are Iran, Russia, and China. They're working together to defeat the U.S. in the Gulf and weaken American deterrence. If Iran emerges with a veto over Strait of Hormuz oil flows and U.S. credibility is damaged, Mr. Trump will be hurt. But the bigger losers in the long run will be countries that depend on American power to deter aggressors. See Ukraine 2014 and 2022 and Gaza 2023. The Allies may come to regret their short-term Schadenfreude, pleasure at someone else's misfortune, about Mr. Trump's Hormuz predicament. From the opinion pages, war requires ugly choices. If Trump wants to exit rather than escalate, he can take out Iran's oil infrastructure. By Holman W. Jenkins, Jr. Presidents miscalculate in war all the time. From John F. Kennedy's launching the Bay of Pigs invasion and inviting the Diem coup in Vietnam, to Lyndon Johnson escalating without believing in victory, to Harry Truman failing to draw a red line around Korea, to George W. Bush pinning so much of the public case against Saddam Hussein on weapons of mass destruction. The Trump administration didn't fail to perceive the Hormuz Strait risk. I bet a regime survivor, also known as Iranian Delcy Rodriguez, would quickly sue for peace and make the issue moot in a case of scenario fixation syndrome. Now U.S. prestige has been committed. The best must be made of it. Options include a convoying and fire suppression effort to take control of the Persian Gulf, an open-ended military commitment. Or the U.S. might make a hostage of Iran's own oil exports, which are actually increasing while the regime gives itself free passage in the Gulf. A U.S. Marine flotilla may be on its way to Karg Island, where it would need constant overhead protection against Iranian drones and missiles. Add that Iran is believed to have 50 days of output stored on tankers, about half of it around Singapore. Then an idea that seems to be grudgingly considered: leveling Iran's oil industry, forcing Iran's customers, neighbors, and allies to deal with the mess. Mr. Trump, understandably, finds the notion repulsive. Just days earlier, picturing a friendly or at least compliant regime that would marry its oil power to America's in the great game with China. Mr. Trump bombed military emplacements on Karg, but, as he put it, spared an attack that would knock the hell out of the pipes. Iran's normal incentive, let's understand, is not to interfere with Hormuz shipping, making an enemy of its own customers, especially China. The exception, when the regime is under existential terminal threat, exactly the consideration Mr. Trump set out to create. That's why his regime change war has become an oil war. I'm aware of the speculation that the U.S. acted to take an Iranian threat off the board in light of a possible Taiwan contingency. The counter-argument: weakness is provocative. The U.S. has shown its military highly capable, all the more reason to challenge it while it's distracted and its stocks are low. Mr. Trump has made a situation for himself. If Iran can't be coaxed by China or other mediators to reach terms, he may have to escalate more than he ever intended or wanted to. The only U.S. flag officer to win a Pulitzer, Admiral William Sims, wrote in 1920s The Victory at Sea that the point of escorting Allied shipping in World War I wasn't to protect the ships. Convoys were bait. German subs were forced to surface in the presence of Allied destroyers or give up the fight, as they did. In the Gulf today, the parallels are exactly zip. Iran not only fields elusive, multi-pronged threats to shipping traffic via speedboat, drone, mine, and missile. It need only threaten the flow to stop it. But there's a flip side. The U.S. is a net exporter. Oil is a shrinking share of household budgets and total domestic output. The U.S. economy is more flexible, not least because of the Carter-era deregulation of transportation. In the Iranian Revolution of 1979, oil reached $165 in today's money. Analysts are fretting now about the possibility of $150. The Soviet Union is no more. The main beneficiary of 1980's Carter Doctrine, which held that the U.S. must defend the Gulf even at the risk of nuclear war, is China. Strategic conceptions are ripe to be overhauled in the heat of crisis. U.S. troops don't need to be risked to protect China's oil. If a reasonable settlement isn't forthcoming, Mr. Trump can tell Tehran the U.S. will unleash its precision munitions on its export infrastructure. Mr. Trump can still hope a better option will materialize. The outcome I'd bet on. China or other intercessors will engineer the out he seeks because they fear his escalation. But this outcome will receive impetus only if he shows himself willing to follow the logic of the regime change war he started and the oil war he got. Ironically, the U.S. was already in a good and improving position in Iran, thanks to the regime's domestic unpopularity, Mr. Trump's sanctions, and U.S. and Israeli suppression of its nuclear program and air defenses. The U.S., in other words, was in a good position to attend to other priorities, such as rebuilding its military stockpiles and adapting to a new strategic environment and new war technologies. More than its allies, the U.S. has done the right things on energy and national security investments. China is still a long way from being able to act militarily in the Gulf. Remember, Mr. Trump's larger purpose was supposed to be redistributing peacekeeping duties to regional stakeholders so the U.S. can focus on bigger matters. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Regime Change is Inexorable by John Bolton. Ending the war now is untenable. As Trump said last week, we don't want to go back every 2 years. How does President Trump expect the Iran war to end? He's been ambiguous about the answer, saying in an interview last Friday that he'll know it when I feel it in my bones. Some of his advisors and supporters urge him to stop short of a change of regime in Tehran. But the logic of regime change is inexorable, unyielding, unalterable. If the president wasn't fully resolved to remove the Ayatollahs, he should never have initiated so ambitious a military effort. Strikes on military targets alone won't topple the regime. Instead, they must debilitate the institutions of state power, notably the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and the Basij militia. That would prove the regime's inability to defend itself, signifying it can't long survive, and exacerbating divisions within a system already rocked by an accelerated succession crisis and the elimination of many top leaders. Iran's opposition must help intensify regime collapse by working with disaffected officials, civil and military. Mr. Trump is already failing in one key respect. Many Iranians feel betrayed, fearing mortal reprisals if the regime survives. Regime change failure would also pose grave risks in 3 critical areas: oil, international terrorism, and nuclear weapons. Tehran last week closed the Strait of Hormuz, through which most Gulf-produced oil passes, causing turmoil in global markets, increased oil prices, and stock market declines. The administration says the blockade took it by surprise. In the war's opening days, the U.S. and Israel rightly gave priority to eliminating Iran's air defenses and its ballistic missile retaliatory strike capability. But closing Hormuz was also an Iranian retaliatory option that warranted urgent attention. Iran's mine-laying ships were destroyed late, 10 days into the operation, and attacks on drone and small boat mine-laying efforts, reducing threats to oil tankers, are still underway, as the strikes on Karg Island underline. A reported attack over the weekend on Bandar-e-Jask, outside the strait, might have stopped Iranian oil exports there. It would be untenable for the White House to declare victory while it remains unsafe to export Gulf oil. The Ayatollahs now have palatable evidence of what closing the strait means for the global economy. If they remain in power, they will never forget it. The lessons being learned in the Strait of Hormuz apply with even more force to Tehran's support for international terrorism and its nuclear weapons and ballistic missile programs. Should the regime survive, it will undoubtedly resume work on both fronts. On terrorism, if the U.S.-Israeli campaign is fostering a new generation of terrorists, as some anti-regime change critics contend, those future threats will be far more menacing if a terrorist-sponsoring, oil-rich regime holds sway in Tehran. Russia and China have undoubtedly provided Iran nuclear weapons and ballistic missile assistance in years gone by. Moscow is reportedly supplying Tehran with both military intelligence and battlefield insights from its experience using Iran's drones in combat against Ukraine. If regime change fails, the Ayatollahs will seek increased cooperation on such matters and more, such as missile defense. South Korean missile defenses, now operational in the United Arab Emirates, have doubtless attracted attention in both Iran and North Korea. Future destruction of Iran's nuclear program will only be harder. The president's partner, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, knows the inexorable logic of regime change well. So do Iran's Ayatollahs, whose fanaticism justifies any sacrifice to ensure not military victory, but regime survival, living to fight another day. And Mr. Trump has made this point himself. In Kentucky, on March 11th, he said, "We don't want to go back every 2 years. There will be some day when you don't have me as president. Perhaps you'll have a weak, pathetic person like we've had in the past." Newsom's climate false alarms. Global warming isn't behind California's wildfires, and fires around the world are declining. By Bjorn Lomborg. Gavin Newsom is raising alarms on climate change again and getting basic facts wrong. The California governor vows to sue the federal government over the Trump administration's repeal of the Environmental Protection Agency's 2009 endangerment finding, the main legal basis under the Clean Air Act for mandating reductions in carbon dioxide emissions. Mr. Newsom claims the reversal will trigger more deadly wildfires and more extreme heat deaths. Age-adjusted heat-related death risk in California has risen modestly in recent decades, enough to account for 90 additional annual deaths, likely linked to higher temperatures. But he omits the other side. Warming has helped reduce age-adjusted cold-related deaths by more than 5,000 a year. Citing only the tiny heat increase while ignoring the large decrease in cold-related deaths is misleading. As for wildfires, Mr. Newsom has long wrongly focused on California and the western U.S. while ignoring that global warming is global. He has repeatedly referred to California as the tip of the spear of climate change, including after last January's Palisades fire. Years earlier, amid West Coast wildfires, he said climate change's role cannot be denied, that the science was absolute and the data self-evident. Global data contradict this. The National Aeronautics and Space Administration satellites have tracked fires globally for more than 25 years. In the early 2000s, about 3% of the world's land burned annually, in total acreage and area about twice Mexico's size. The trend since has been downward. 2022 had a record low of 2.169%, and 2025 nearly matched it at 2.198%, the second lowest. That's a reduction of over 25%, sparing an area of land larger than Texas and California combined each year. North America is the only continent where burned area is increasing, but it accounts for only 2.2% of the global total. Despite Mr. Newsom's pronouncements, global warming isn't the main driver of fires in North America. Poor planning put more houses in extreme fire risk zones. California's surge in wildfires stems overwhelmingly from poor forest management, decades of fire suppression that build up fuels, with almost no prescribed burns. Studies indicate nearly 20% of the state needs controlled burns to reduce risk, yet only 0.1% to 0.3% receives them annually. Wildfire carbon dioxide emissions have also plummeted globally, hitting a satellite era low last year, down 3 billion tons from early 2000s levels. This undercuts claims of supercharged fires and feedback loops of carbon release. The wildfire decline is a century-long pattern driven by human adaptation. Mr. Newsom's push for aggressive mandates and lawsuits to preserve federal climate rules ignores these facts and gives priority to high-cost, low-benefit policies. According to United Nations models, even if the world's wealthiest nations made major emissions reductions, far exceeding what California or the U.S. could do, the effect would be negligible. It would avert less than 0.2% degree Fahrenheit of warming at significant cost. Emerging economies will drive most future emissions. Policies like California's vehicle mandates have imposed economic pain for negligible global effect, a trade-off voters elsewhere have rejected. Global fires are dramatically declining in extent, emissions, pollution death risk, and intensity. Mr. Newsom's rhetoric may energize his supporters, but Americans deserve evidence-based policies, not cherry-picked alarm. The Pepper and Salt cartoon shows two businessmen walking along a corridor carrying a cup of coffee in one hand and their briefcases in another. And one turns and says, "Investors remain optimistic because they're not paying attention." You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the March 18th, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal. We read from the Wall Street Journal every Monday through Thursday at 11 p.m. Your reader has been Corrine. Thank you for listening.